Welcome to the San Jose Hockey Now podcast. I'm Sheng, editor-in-chief of San Jose Hockey Now. You can also find my work at MEC Sharks and on Twitter at Sheng_Peng.
And I'm Keegan McNally. You can find me on Twitter at halfwall_hockey, my website half-wallhockey.com, or at San Jose Hockey Now. This week, what do we got, Sheng?
The Macklin Celebrini hype train keeps on rolling here. So ESPN's college hockey color commentator Colby Cohen joins us. And I wanted to talk to Colby in particular about Celebrini because Colby is a BU alum. So he's got the insight on BU guys like Celebrini. And also, too, in his role as the ESPN's college hockey guy, he watched a lot of Celebrini's games this year. And Colby does not shy away at all from the Sidney Crosby and Jonathan Toews comparisons that Celebrini has been getting.
Yeah, it was the hype podcast, I think, for Macklin Celebrini. We've had a few episodes that are hype worthy for Celebrini, but Colby definitely, he watched every single game of him for the past year, and he definitely has a lot of good things to say about Celebrini. So that
Great
bodes
things
well.
to say.
Yeah, and also had a couple tidbits about other college hockey players like Will Smith as well. So great interview. Guys should stick around for it. This week, it's a little bit of a lighter news week, I'd say. Yeah. We're in the full off season, I guess.
Almost dog days of August here.
Exactly. August is really when it's very dead, but we got a few things to talk about. Sharks kind of completed their RFA checklist with Henry Thrun and Thomas Bordeleau getting a contract, as well as we're also going to touch on the World Junior Summer Showcase, which is kind of like a pre-World Junior Championship tryout kind of tournament with Finland, Sweden, and the U.S.
And Canada.
Is there Canada?
Yep.
Oh, okay, and Canada. Then finally, we're going to mention Bret Hedican, who we mentioned on the last podcast, was leaving the Sharks broadcast and what his new role is going to be as he transitions to the San Diego Gulls. So,
yep. And I wanted to mention about the summer showcase that the Sharks have a lot of prospects there that Keegan will talk about some of them that caught his eye in particular, but just want to mention them really fast. So Quentin Musty, Brandon Svoboda for Team USA, Leo Solomon Wallenius and Axel Landon for Finland, and Sam Dickinson and Carson Wesch for Canada.
It's a fun tournament. It's a little bit of a summer hockey tournament, but it's good to see some guys that you don't get a lot of praise for, right? Like this Axel Landon and Brandon Svoboda picks, right. A little bit later guys.
And you've got some Svoboda praise in a little bit, but let's tickle the feather a little bit.
That's true. You gotta skip ahead. Hit the link that goes to the timestamp if you want to listen to the World Junior Summer Showcase talk. But let's start with Thomas Bordeleau. Thomas Bordeleau, obviously second round pick in 2020. Very well regarded throughout his coming up through the Sharks ranks because he had a very good draft plus one season. He had a breakout year with the University of Michigan. Scored a lot of points, then eventually entered into the NHL in his draft plus 2 year, played a few games, scored a very impressive shootout goal against Vegas that everybody remembers, and then kind of has been bouncing around between the AHL and NHL since,
right?
Where we're waiting for him to kind of stick in the lineup. So we got him to the point where at the end of last year, he did stick for the last 20 games or so and played very well, we think, comparatively to how his normal NHL stints have gone. So Sharks obviously rewarded that with another year to try and prove himself in the NHL. But do you think that this is kind of the make or break year for Thomas Bordeleau?
Ooh, that's a good question. Maybe not. We're not quite at make or break, but maybe we're getting close to it. Mm-hmm. It is important to note that Thomas is still going to be waiver exempt in the 2024-25 season. So that's really when it's make or break, when you're going to put a guy on waivers if he doesn't make your team. So we're not quite there with Bordeleau yet, but it has really been an interesting last couple of years in terms of Bordeleau's development, right? Like he shoots onto the Shark scene in 2022, right? You mentioned the shootout goal, and the hype train for Bordeleau is strong in 2022 when he
Sure.
makes his debut, right? But even back then, though, I think that there were a lot of red flags in his game that I think people were overlooking because the highlights were there and he was pretty productive. He formed a nice line with Rudy Bolger and Noel Gregor. So those will be names in the future of like, who? But that's only a couple years ago. But they formed a very effective line for a few games there, a very effective offensive line at least. But again, like I said, there are red flags in his game, and those red flags came out in his next couple of NHL stints.
Yep.
In the 2022-23 season, at the end of the season, he came up. He looked very not very good.
Sure. Yeah.
And at the beginning of last season, as a centerman, 2023-24, he started the season with the Sharks. Of course, this was the Sharks team that would start off 0-10-1. And so it was a tough spot for Bordeleau to be in, but he did not look up to NHL pace or speed there. And finally, we get to his last call up at the end of the season where he scores a little bit more. He's on the wing. He is reacting faster to playing fast, playing with more pace. He is paying more attention on the defensive end. And really importantly, too, for Bordeleau, he isn't throwing the puck away all over the place in the neutral zone, which really was a problem consistently through his first 3 NHL stints, even the good one, the first one. And he was not doing that as much. David Quinn said that Bordeleau was valuing the puck in every zone. And so that gave a lot of hope for him. But Bordeleau was doing this on an awful Sharks team. And this will be the question facing really every Sharks player, especially the young ones. Can you play the minutes you played last year? Can you produce like you did last year with less minutes, with more defensive responsibility and expectations and whatnot, right? And that same question will go for William Macklin, for Fabian Zetterlund. And the same question goes to Thomas Bordeleau, that can he, if he is the same player that he was last year, that's not quite good enough yet, but it's at least an upward trend. We talked on this podcast a lot that Bordeleau really was trending downward for a little bit and was looking Ryan Merkley-ish. Ryan Merkley-ish.
Merklish.
4 syllables, yeah. Merkley-ish. For a little bit there, because I was hearing reports of just his attitude not being the best, not wanting to kind of conform his game to what's going to work at NHL. And he started doing that at the end there. We saw better results. He stayed in the lineup. He wasn't hurting the team, even when he wasn't scoring. And so the next step is, can he get even better? Can he get stronger, quicker? All these things take another level, right? But I will give him a lot of credit because it was really going the wrong way for a while there. And he turned it around at the end of last season. And so very curious to see. I think a lot of people are counting him out. The Sharks have a lot of forwards, yes, signed and whatnot, right? And so right now it looks like Bordeleau and Daniil Gushin, both waiver exempt, might be a little pushed out in terms of just the raw sort of the numbers, right? The numbers game right now, right? And that might be the case in the end if we don't count injuries that are going to come up and whatnot. That might be the case in the end. But Bordeleau really showed a lot, I think, with how he was able to adjust his game. And we've seen with a lot of players, once they can adjust and start playing with just, how do you say it? Stop being sort of a black hole on the ice. Like, stop hurting the team. If they can get to the point where they stop hurting the team, then you can start to see the things that they do to help the team, right?
Sure.
And so Bordeleau started doing that at the end of last season. He stopped hurting the NHL team. And so I think he showed a lot by kind of raising his game to that level. So I wouldn't discount him being able to do that next year.
It's an interesting transition because it felt very much like there wasn't going to be a Bordeleau in the future for the Sharks until that last quarter of the season. And obviously the last quarter of the season, we've been fooled before.
I'm not sure if they were going to qualify him. I don't know that.
Yeah.
I don't know either way on that, but yeah.
Well, yeah, or maybe they try and find a way to make a deal with somebody else or something like that. But yeah, and then he kind of turned it around, and he played hard, and he worked his balls off as as the. So I want him to do more of that because Bordeleau has skill above a lot of the players in the bottom six, and he's a little small, and occasionally he can turn the switch off, and when that switch turns off, he's very ineffective. Not just
right. But he is also,
very.
and I've said this before, deceptively strong.
He is,
and for his size at least,
for
and
sure.
he does offer more variety to this game in that he is a terrific face-off
He
guy.
is, which is an interesting thing about, because normally like young guys are not, but he is, because he's very low center of gravity. He has an interesting face-off style, and he's been good since college in face-off. So he does have some utility there. He just has to find a niche, I think, is the big thing with Bordeleau.
And they were doing that with him last year on the power play. He was very, very successful on the power play with the Sharks. And a lot of it was he was making that extra play. He was really like a good connecting piece. And Jack Hahn actually mentioned Bordeleau last week when we talked with Jack about the Sharks power play and why it was so successful at the end of the season. And the three names that he mentioned were Granlund, Eklund, and Bordeleau. And I agree. Those are the three best players on the Sharks power play. And I include Bordeleau in there because Bordeleau would just get that extra puck and just that little extra effort to move the puck to the next guy. Those little things. And also Bordeleau was taking a lot of the faceoffs on the power play over Granlund because I think Bordeleau might be a better faceoff man than the veteran Granlund already. And on the power play, you have the extra man, so you don't worry so much about sort of the defensive drawbacks of having Bordeleau as NHL center there. So
so he has utility. It's just the fit, right? He's got to find a way to utilize those specific skills, which they don't like always equate to having a solid lineup position, but they could. Like he's just very good in specific situations. But I mean, I think he's going to work hard. Based on this last 6 months, I think he will find his way into a lineup, hopefully, for the Sharks. But nothing's set in stone, obviously. And the other thing you mentioned as well is that there are a lot of power play guys that have been kind of added in, right? Like Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini and Taylor Toffoli. These guys are probably, and Wenberg, might get some power play time as well. That their utility, especially Will Smith and Toffoli, I think and probably Celebrini too. It's just they seem like they're going to find ways to be on the power play, and Wallman as well, right? So
and then also add to what Granlund, Eklund, and Zetterlund to the Lunds. So.
Granlund, Eklund, Zetterlund, Wallman.
So there's 8 forwards that are already there that you can count on for probable power play time.
Maybe Mukamadulin if they want to have play some. So running out of spots is all it is. Obviously, this is all kind of like roster projections without like
rosterbation.
Yeah, rosterbation, because every year 5 people get injured in training camp, and then we're like, all right, well, I guess.
And then rosterbation goes a little flaccid.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting. If everybody's healthy, you do wonder where these guys are going to fit. And that also applies to our other RFA signing, and Henry Thrun as well, who signed a 2-year, $1 million AAV contract, so $2 million total. Henry Thrun, 23 years old, played a pretty much full season in the NHL last year, 51 games as opposed to 18 in the AHL. Up and down, I guess is the way to put that season with Henry Thrun.
Yeah. The team didn't help though, so that always needs to start every conversation.
Yeah,
every Shark last season.
Every defenseman looked like a pile of garbage, essentially, at times.
At times, yeah.
Yeah, and then sometimes they look okay. And the same thing happened with Thrun, right? Like, I think Thrun has a very good first pass. I think Thrun has decent one-on-one defensive ability. I think he has okay strength. I think he's a decent skater. He's very good at a lot of things. I wouldn't say he's exceptional at, like, anything.
Sure.
But he's just kind of good at a lot. And he's smart. He's very smart as a hockey player. But yeah, up and down was the way to put it. But they signed him to a 2-year, $1 million AAV contract, which ends as him being an RFA still, which is interesting. It's kind of like a bridge, prove it, you're going to be around probably kind of deal.
Right.
But it's way the money works out.
You don't want to sell yourself short though and sign, say, a 3-4 year contract for a low AAV, and then by year 3 of it, you're a really good player. So I think that's always the
so
balance,
like it's
right? The longer the contract is, the more AAV you have to give, and maybe the Sharks don't want to do it, or maybe Henry doesn't want to take a higher AAV, but still not that high, like say 3 years, $6 million.
Yeah, maybe he thinks that third year, by that time, he's going to solidify himself and be worth $3 to $4 million a year, as opposed to like 1 or 2.
Yeah, maybe.
The Sharks now have a plethora of left-handers, right? So they've got Jake Wallman, they've got Mark-Edouard Vlasic, they've got Mario Ferraro, Henry Thrun, and Shakir Mukhamadullin. So what's that, 5?
That's 5. And then the 3 righties right now that we're seeing there are Ruda, Benning, and I'm blanking. Ruda, Benning, and Emberson.
Yep.
And I'm going to mention too, because people say I forget about Jack Thompson. So I guess he can be in a picture, but again, I did not forget Jack Thompson. He's got to take another step. So
he's here. He's waivers exempt. So
yeah,
all signs point to, unless they really need a right-handed defenseman or somebody gets injured like Ruta,
unless he already has an amazing summer, which maybe he has had.
You're right. We are forgetting about Jack Thompson, but we're kind of naming the 8 names I think that we think are going to be around towards the end of training camp. But we'll see. I mean, Jack Thompson,
they'll still add somebody too. I think they still need to add. That's what we've talked a lot about, but they haven't. So maybe they're going to roll with these 8.
Yeah, they haven't added the defenseman or the goalie yet that we want them to add. maybe soon. But yeah, Thrun, I like the deal. I think it makes sense for both Thrun and for the Sharks. That'd be my statement. What else you got?
Sure, absolutely. I think I like Henry a lot. I've talked a lot about that. I think that he has the sort of the mental fortitude to go through what the Sharks went through last year. And as a defenseman too, that's even tougher than a little bit tougher than what Willie Macklin went through, which was plenty tough for a young player to go through all that losing, right? And I think that Henry has sort of future leadership that's a possibility for him, like to show that kind of fortitude and that kind of season, to not be too hard on himself, and to get off the mat and still play 20 minutes a night, when on a better team he wouldn't be playing that many minutes a night, and to keep at it and keep growing his game, I think says a lot about his character. And like we mentioned, he may not be good at any or great at any specific skill, but he's good in a lot. He's well-rounded, right? He's good in a lot of different areas. And so I look forward to seeing how he develops on a better team. Hopefully this Sharks team is a platform for that. I wonder, with sort of the number of left-handers that they have and the dearth of right-handers, I wonder if somebody's going to move over to the right side. I wonder who that would be. Personally, I'm really hoping he'll add excitement to the Sharks, obviously, but the Sharks need a puck mover, and he also is a big-time prospect, Shakir Mukhamadullin. He's also 2020 first-round pick, too, so it's kind of time for him to put up or shut up, too. And so I think you want to give Shakir every sort of surrounding or avenue to succeed. So if that's on the left side, his natural left side, then okay, that's fine. And then somebody's got to be maybe forced over to the right side. Don't know who that would be, but I hope that there's a spot I want to see a lineup. The Sharks will want to see this too, because it means that their younger defensemen are progressing and they're playing fairly well. You want to see Thrun and Mukhamadullin in the lineup every night, basically. You don't want too much of the other veterans. The veterans can't sit if Mukhamadullin and Thrun have taken the next step.
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to, like, based on the numbers, probably like 2 of the 3 of Thrun, Mukhamadullin, and Emberson are going to be playing most nights, I think.
Hopefully all of them are playing.
Or all, depending on who's injured and what.
Right.
Or we can figure out what to do with Jan Ruta and what to do with Mark-Edouard Vlasic. Like, they're kind of just there, but I don't feel like either one. I mean, Vlasic obviously has been a good soldier his entire Sharks career, but neither one feel like the they're going to be contributing to a longer term Sharks team. So
yeah, I would agree with that.
And they're fine defenders. They're both just bottom pairing guys right now, and it's what they are. But yeah, you got to kind of figure out how to get them out the door while putting in your younger guys. So that'll be a challenge for this year.
If the three youngsters can be so good that it forces a trade of a Ruda's only got 1 year left, a little bit high AAV, but he's probably movable with his Stanley Cup experience and whatnot. His, been around the game for so long. He's probably movable. But right now, though, I wouldn't go ahead. The Sharks are still lacking until we see what they've got with these young defensemen. The defense is still looking pretty rough like last year. The difference is that the forwards look a lot better, so that will help the defense look better, I think. But the defense is still looking pretty rough. And so until we see what we've got, in maybe Mukmadulin is taking a huge step, maybe Emberson, maybe Thrun, maybe Jack Thompson, one of those guys. So if those guys start to do that, then you can start to think about, now we actually have depth and we can move somebody. But but until we see that, though, at the moment, I'm not convinced. And so I do wonder if August is going to be more of a time for PTOs to sign. So maybe that's what the Sharks are waiting for. They don't want to give a guaranteed contract to one of the veteran UFA defensemen still out there. So that could be what they're holding on to. There's also, as you get closer to camp, cap space. Maybe some players will be waived for cap space reasons too. So we'll see. So it still seems, I guess I would say, I would predict that the Sharks will still add another defenseman, even if it's not a particularly high-end guy, but it's somebody that maybe they have hope, though, can be a regular guy for them this year. So that would be what I predict.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hopeful optimism with the Sharks defense right now.
That's every year, and we see what happens, right? So
they need a lot of help. They're doing a great job rebuilding the forward group. We got Dickinson, which is going to help in the future, but they need some help making this a competitive team in the next couple of years on defense, because it is bad. It's still bad.
It's so
bad last year. And we'll see.
I would say going by the positions, top six still bad. Bottom six actually good. We talked about the bottom six projected of Nico Sturm, Wenberg, Cunnin, Gaudreau, Grunstrom, and Dellandre. That's actually a good bottom
with
six.
Some like options like Bordeleau, Gushin,
Gushin mixing
like
in.
That.
Defense still bad.
Still bad.
Goaltending, okay.
Mediocre. Yeah. So that's where we stand as a team. If you were doing
my general analysis.
If you were doing the NHL 24 things, where it'd be like forward group, B-, like defense group, C-, goalie, B- kind of thing, something like that.
Well, is that your grades right now?
I think so, right? Like maybe B- for the forwards, C- for the defense.
That's pretty high for forwards, because the most important part of the forwards is the top six.
Yeah, maybe C+ and maybe D+ for the forwards.
I'm gonna go C- for the forwards.
Okay.
Really got to see what you've got in Celebrini and Smith. The defense, I would give
D+, maybe D.
I'm still thinking it's an F. I like Wallman as a player. I've always liked Farrell as a player, but I still don't see them as guys that it looks like they'll be playing still 23 a night or whatever, right? I don't necessarily see that out of those guys. Maybe Wallman, we don't know him as well, so maybe he does have that in him to do that well. He has some upside still, but the defense, I like all the Sharks' young defensemen, but
they need time.
I'm never a guy to count on it until we actually see it.
Yeah.
And so we haven't seen it yet. So right now, I would give the defense D- or F+ to be honest. And again, I could the Sharks know the guys better, and so they may know something about how Thrun's summer or Mukamudulin's summer, or how Matt Benning is recovering, things like that. But from what I can see from my vantage point right now, that's my grade. And a goaltending, maybe a C-, C. There's better duels, but it's
Mhm.
not bad. You have two guys there that are, I think, talented when they're healthy, capable starters, which is actually pretty good. I would say most teams may not every team would
I,
necessarily have two guys who are capable of at least being one
yeah,
ace.
I think I was going by the video game where even like the worst team in the NHL is still like C's across the board, because like they do a gradient scale where like they have like AHL
Oh, really?
players and stuff. So even like the worst teams are still like
Well, what would you
C's.
grade the 2023-24 Sharks? If that team gets anything that's
Oof.
not F's across the board, except for the goaltending, then that's what I.
Can we
That's
do
my
power
curve,
play
right? That's
alone?
my
The power
curve.
play was okay. I don't know. I think
The
now I
power
would,
play was still 21st in the league, so it wasn't.
but it was like seventh after January.
Well, what is that? That's a C plus then, right? So
Yeah. Anyway, I think I don't know. I think now I'd probably give them like a C plus forwards. I think they're
okay,
decent in the bottom six. I think the top six is bad overall, but could get better.
could get better.
I'd give them a D defense. D for defense.
I think that's kind.
That's very kind. And then like a C plus for goaltending because it's the off season and I'm optimistic.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. And again, I want the defense to prove me wrong, please.
Yeah. Yeah, I want Jake Wellman to score like 25 goals next year or something.
Win an Norris Trophy and
Yeah.
stick it. Yeah,
Dude's
stick
got
stick
it.
it to my face.
Yeah, dude's gonna gritty all over us, and it'll be fine.
I
do
want to
think that
start
he-
my Norris Trophy acceptance speech not with thanking somebody, but to say "F you" to Sheng.
Nephew to Shang Peng. I do think Wallman has some untapped, offensive
I agree.
talent.
I agree.
And it might come out if he's the power play guy because the Sharks don't have another one.
Has a great shot. I could see him being 15,
Yeah.
maybe a 15 goal guy for the Sharks, something
Sure.
like that. I think
25,
that's
30 point
possible.
defenseman. I think that
Yeah,
makes a lot
15
of
goals,
sense.
maybe 35, maybe even who knows, maybe even 40. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that is possible with the opportunity that is being given to him, but
It was an interesting pickup.
Yeah,
It's still not enough for the Sharks, but Greer's just smart. I really appreciate the way that Greer adds players and the way that he finds these kind of diamond in the rough guys. And 75% of them don't work out, but then sometimes they do, and you're kind of forming a team of guys like that. So, and plus you're superstars. So. Okay, we have a lot more rosterbation to talk about in the next couple of weeks because we're gonna have like a month and a half of this. So let's move away from that.
a whole month for dating. So
Yeah, basically.
dating something.
Yeah, where it's all just projections and lineups and that kind of thing. But let's talk a little bit about the World Junior Summer Showcase.
Actual hockey on the ice.
It was honestly a great. I did this last year where I remembered it was playing or was happening, and then I really wanted to watch like Will Smith and a bunch of other prospects. Eric Polkamp made a huge impression at World Junior Summer Showcase, which actually helped him get to the World Junior Championship 6 months later. So I think the interesting thing is that Brandon Svoboda is kind of making that same sort of thing happen.
Okay.
In my opinion, he's playing a center role. He's playing a hard-nosed play against the boards, play net front, win faceoffs kind of guy that has like a touch of skill and can complete some passes.
Yeah, he's got like 5 points in 2 games.
Yeah, he's doing really well, and I watched all of his points in those games, and they're not like he's dangling through 5 guys. It's more like he digs the puck out across the boards and then like flings it to a guy, or like it just kind of kicks off his skate and then like goes to another player who scores. But it's fun to watch because USA doesn't seemingly, at least on USA, I think he's on USA Blue, doesn't have a lot of guys like that, and they're really using him in that role. And it's interesting because the Sharks drafted him with that knowledge that he's a long-term prospect, right? Like he was a 3rd round pick
Right, they traded up for him too, I believe.
They traded up for him. Whether or not that was to get a goalie in that draft, we don't really know. But they did think that he had a lot of upside, at least to fill into a role, like a third, fourth line center role, win faceoffs, compete against other bigger guys, the bottom six, sit in front of the net, bang home rebounds, that kind of player. And even though his points weren't very good, he's kind of slowly developing. He looked good in development camp, and he's looking great in this tournament with a bunch of stars like Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard and Hagens and guys that are very clearly way more skilled than him. He's still showing out and doing very well. So that same thing happened last year with Eric Polkamp, and they invited him to the roster, and he played a few games. And I do wonder if that's what's going to happen with Svoboda, just because there's not a lot of guys that fill that bottom six role for Team USA right now.
Right. Yeah, I think Chris Peters wrote, and I think the three guys, just for everybody listening, if you want to keep up with the summer showcase, the three guys I've been keeping up with, Chris Peters, Stephen Ellis, Mike Morial, they're all there on site. And anyway, back to Svoboda, I think that he is also an interesting case study because for a lot of, what do you call online draft people? Draftniks?
Amateur. I call them amateur scouts. So it's
okay,
like
amateur scouts. Okay, whatever you want to call
you're
them.
You're an amateur, but you're also doing amateur scouting. So I call them amateur scouts. That's also me. Like it's just me as well.
But Svoboda is not necessarily the most popular kind of pick for among those types, right? Like,
absolutely.
People always look at, say, the Carolina Hurricanes, how they draft, right? And they probably would never draft a guy like a Svoboda.
Sure.
Because he's not a high upside guy. He's not a lot. Will never score. Even right now at a lower level at USHL, he's not scoring a lot.
Nope.
He probably won't score a lot at that level, but does he have the tools to be a winning NHL player? That's what the Sharks are betting on. And that's what some amateur scouts may not bet on, right? They might not draft him they would never trade up for him. They'll never spend a pick as good or as high quality as a third round pick on a guy like this, right? And the Sharks also spent a pick on like that on a Carson Wentz this past year.
They did.
And I'm not declaring victory for eye test or whatever, right? This is just World Junior Summer Showcase. It doesn't mean a whole lot in the big picture of making it to the NHL and having a role. But I think though that a guy like a Svoboda and West, right? These are going to be interesting case studies though when you compare how the Sharks draft. Have drafted the last couple of years with Chris Morehouse, and maybe how you think they should have drafted, or how they're drafting under Morehouse and how they used to draft under Doug Wilson Jr. Maybe a Svoboda also would not have been high up on DW Junior's list, right? And so anyway, I just think that's what I find interesting about all this about Svoboda, because you look at his stats last year, USHL. I'm not even sure if he was at half a point at the USHL. Maybe three quarters. I don't know.
Well, I think last year he got to half point, but the year in his draft year he was way below.
Okay, so either way though, right? That's not
good.
That's not going to be his calling card necessarily, right? But if he fashions himself into not just a guy who makes the NHL, but into a winning fourth line center or even a winning third line center, if you can get a little more offense out of him.
Sure.
Anyway, so I'm really just interested in that part. I think that part is fascinating.
No, I agree. It's after the Sharks drafted Brandon Svoboda last year, I went back and watched a lot of his games, and I didn't hate him. Like, I really didn't. I hated the fact that he wasn't producing, but I was not like unimpressed with his game. I wrote like I think he ended up at like number 20 for the Sharks prospects for me at that time, which sounds bad, but there's a lot of good prospects.
Yeah, Sharks are pretty deep.
But he has specific like tools that remind me of a lot of NHL fourth line centers, like your Nico Sturms, like that kind of thing. And obviously, I think scouts kind of can occasionally put their own biases of what they see in players into other players, which becomes problematic. And, you always worry about those kind of reaches where they're not producing. But maybe Svoboda really can turn into that. And I do think that he has a shot to make a World Junior Championship team, but based on the numbers, he would be like, I don't know, 20th probably in terms of actual forwards for Team USA, probably. But
or maybe not even invited to the showcase just based on pure production, right?
But he fits a role, and that's sometimes all you need, both the NHL and the World Junior Summer Showcase or World Junior Championship as well.
I want to play devil's advocate too, because I just played devil's advocate. So I'm going to reverse it too. That probably the argument for just going high upside with every pick is that if even one or two of these guys hit, then it sort of makes up, right, for the entire sort of whack-a-mole that you've been doing at the draft, right? And the guys like the Svoboda, Nico Sturm types that maybe you can just acquire through free agency or through trade or whatever, right? So I think that would be the counter argument, which I think is a fair argument too. I just think it's interesting. I'm not really saying that one approach is better than the other, right? But I just think that they're clearly different approaches, though, that we see at play here.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And the counter argument is like, well, why spend a third round pick on possibly a fourth line center in the future when you could just go sign one for $1 million? Like, what's the point? But at the same time, having that control of a good player until they're 26 years old essentially can lead to a very good outcome if you're trying to balance the cap at some point. So it's and also teams tend to overpay for these kind of guys. We see it every single year. They overpay in free agency and the trade market.
Yep.
And
the Sharks probably overpaid for Nico Sturm when they signed him.
Probably. I mean, for sure. So yeah, what I wrote about Brandon Svoboda a year ago when I did my draft rankings or prospect rankings was he's a big-bodied center. These players tend to go very high. He's not slow. He's very physical. He's defensively sound. I was unfamiliar with this game before the draft. I went back and watched some of his tape. He's a prototypical bottom six center. He's not going to wow you with much offensively, but his net front play is advanced. His retrieval skills are above most junior players. I like his trajectory, is what I wrote.
So we might be close to the Shaq meme. I apologize. I was not familiar with your game.
I was not familiar with your game. Well, no, yeah.
I'm not making fun of you. I'm talking about me too and everybody out there. So we'll see. We might be coming to that point with Brandon Svoboda. We'll see.
Yeah, and obviously this is just a summer showcase. So he has to go back and play a full season and actually take a little bit more offensive role, because even the worst bottom six NHL players have touches of offense unless they're just like face punchers, which don't really exist anymore. So they got to have at least a little bit. So he still needs progression for sure. And he hasn't even made it to college yet. So he's going to be like another U in USHL. Oh, and actually, he'll probably go to college next year and then 2-3 more years in college before that. So.
I had to take a little aside here. I really hate the term face puncher.
Face puncher? Why?
I'm really not a fan of that. I think that's really disrespectful of the guys that work their ass off to make the league, and at a lower level they would be pretty good players. But yeah, when they make it to this level, granted their role is not as high, but they're still grinding their ass off. They're still taking it, not just taking punches in the face for the team, but blocking shots, hitting, all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I've never liked that term. I've always found that disrespectful of the fighters and just how hard they work to make it into the league. But that's nothing to do with Brandon Svoboda or.
Well, I guess you should know that it's not like I don't discredit what they do at lower levels, but there are definitely guys that turn off the offense to have punched faces in the league. That's definitely what's happened. And almost all of those guys were still amazing junior scorers and amazing minor scorers, but they,
I would just call them players, though. I guess that's all it is. That's for me. Again, this isn't really directed at you. It's just it's actually been something that I've always thought about, since I got into hockey writing, and I would see it all the time on Twitter. That I would never call a player that myself, because again, I just think that's. I always found that to be disrespectful of the guys, sort of just the role and what this guy does to make it to the NHL. And the other
Well,
things
what would you think
he
about the
brings.
term like grinder or dangler or sniper or playmaker?
Well, face
or...
puncher just sort of sounds like fodder. And, I
So
think
does
also
grinder,
too,
right? Or so does
yeah, but it literally just
grinder literally reminds me of a meat grinder.
But also too, you got to see how people use the term too, right? People don't call people grinders as a pejorative usually, right? Like the grind line
Sometimes.
was one of but not as much as face puncher is always used as a pejorative. I never heard that as a how do you say, as a complimentary term for.
I like face. Sometimes I like those kind of guys.
No,
It just depends.
No, I know, but I'm speaking now. We're talking generally about how fans use the term, right? Like enforcer is a term I've used, right? And that can be negative sometimes, but that's also positive, right? Because that connotes like intimidation. That connotes, right? Face puncher, when you just, again, I've never heard anybody use it positively. Mm-hmm. And so I've always resisted. I've never lied. You can use it if you want. It's a free country, but like I'm gonna go off the rails here, go off topic here, and talk about how I really, 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 really hate the usage of that term. It just I don't know. I think also too, if you add that, face like the literal act of punching of the face, right? Like that literal act, that's what gives people concussions, and we have all that history too, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the ugliness of that term for me too, the kind of disrespectfulness of that term, that these guys are really going back in the day too, and the guys who still do that today, they're really putting their body on the line.
Oh, absolutely.
And, right. And even if like you don't see the reason for it, like, oh, why is Luke Cunning getting into another fight or whatever, right? They think they're trying to do something. The team thinks so. The bench thinks so, right? And so you cannot like the guy or think that's overemphasized, or, oh, why is he doing that again? Or that the momentum you supposedly create from that's all BS or whatever, right? And I mean, those are all different arguments, right? But yeah, I think that they're worthy of a better nickname than I think that they were given in the Twitter age. So
have you heard people be angry about the word face puncher before? I guess is a good question.
No, I haven't heard. Yeah, that's why I'm angry about it, because I don't think anyone's ever been angry about it. But I got a call there. Yeah, I've never heard anybody angry about it. But to me, though, it's always been, again, I've never heard anyone use it in a positive sense, right? And that's what I mean. And I think that, again, the guys like that, if that's their primary role in the NHL, that it's an incredible sacrifice to get there. And
of course,
yeah. So
yeah, I guess it depends on how you view those guys or view their role, and also view whether because like a lot of people, like you're saying, will say like, oh, well, they suck at hockey, and they really don't suck at hockey.
No,
they're really good at hockey.
Yeah.
It's just this was the thing that got them into the NHL. Like this is the thing that carried them through. So, and I want to make it clear, Brandon Svoboda is not that, because we were just talking about Brandon Svoboda. That's not.
And total aside too, that this is a complete aside from everything we talked about, and it's just something that really actually like has bothered me since I started writing. I'm glad that that term has kind of fallen out of favor a little bit.
What I'd be interested in is if you talk to enforcers, if you talk to like, your Scott Parkers and your, not Ryan Reeves, because Ryan Reeves still has some skill, but like those guys, and see what they think. Like what do they think of their role in the NHL?
Well, I will say, I don't know. Yeah, that's actually a very, very good point, that I wonder what their perspective is. But I will say that I've never seen any of those guys that are still around in media, like John Scott, Paul Bissonnette, or just anybody who's around. I don't think I've never seen them use that term to describe themselves. Probably not. Yeah, like enforcer, I've seen, right?
Checker, maybe.
Sure, grinder, all those kind of things,
checker,
right?
fourth liner.
Tough, right? That's
probably
like
not face puncher.
Because there's right. So a lot of these terms that I've mentioned that they use for themselves, there are negative connotations for sure, but there are also positive connotations to being tough, to being an enforcer, right? But face puncher, I don't know if there's any. I've never heard any positive associated with that. So
yeah, I also think that, like, in my mind, there was a difference between the fourth liners of the 90s and 2000s as opposed to now. So I think there's a difference in shift in terms of the actual
sure,
guys
absolutely. There aren't guys anymore
hockey.
that play like 5 minutes a night, and again, the average of fight a night or a fight every 2 nights.
Yeah, like their goal is to get out there and get to a fight as soon as possible.
Right. But even again, those guys, I would not disrespect what they do with a pejorative name. I give a lot of respect again for guys who do that, even if there are a lot of sort of, as we see now with CTE and things like that reasons maybe they shouldn't have done that, but they're out there trying to make a living or whatnot. But anyway, so
yeah, well, I mean, they probably wouldn't shy away from saying their job is to fight people sometimes.
Right. They wouldn't. But again, they would not call themselves a face puncher though, either.
I don't know. I'd say we
I wager so.
I'd talk to him, but I'd also not be close enough that they could throw a punch at
you. Yes.
No, I'm kidding. I'm sure. Honestly,
maybe I'm thinking of a cause that guys
maybe
like that they don't care about, but
maybe they do.
I don't know. I will say, like I said, though, I've never seen any of those guys that are still around on Twitter or whatever. I've never seen them describe themselves as that or. Yeah.
I don't know. Email John Scott. He would love to come on the podcast, maybe.
Yeah, I would love to have him on. Actually, we could just have a 10-minute discussion about the word face punch.
I think it would turn into like an hour and a half long discussion, to be honest. Like, if we had John Scott, I bet you would talk about many an enforcer in the NHL and what he thought his role was. Which would be really fun. I honestly think that would be a great time.
That would be actually.
Anyway, so World Junior Summer Showcase will continue.
Back on track.
Back on this track. We'll continue this week. I'm going to take a look at a few more of the games, try and get a better beat on trying to find out if Brandon Svoboda can actually make this team or not, because that would be super interesting. At least he'll be in the mix, I think, maybe. And then also look at Leo Solomon-Lanius and Axel Landon, how they've been doing. And our Swedish Prince's younger brother, Victor Eklund, who is at this tournament as well. So, and he's making waves. And he's made waves past year or so and doing pretty well. So, interestingly, this is the most interesting part about Victor Eklund. He shoots right, which blows my mind. I don't know why. Just like I see Eklund, I'm like, oh, he's a left hand. And then I watch Victor Eklund, he's a right hand. It just, I don't know.
Perfect on a power play, so dual one-timers.
Right? Eklund to Eklund. I don't know. It just makes me weirded out. I watched a behind-the-net blind pass play that he did. I think it was within the season this past year, and I was like, wait, that's William. But it was Victor. So I think it's cool that he's coming up as a draft eligible for next year. So going to try and catch some games of his as well.
Okay. Yeah, excited for next week for a deeper dive into the World Junior Summer Showcase. I think the USA's first couple games here were split squad, so I think we'll get a more. They're gonna go one team right in their last 3 games, and also play Canada in one of them too. So
yeah, they're letting go a few of the guys I think that have already made the team, that kind of thing.
Right, the returning guys.
Yep. So will be interesting to see for sure.
It'll be Brandon Svoboda's time to shine.
And also, I mean, we should talk about Quentin Musty, just because Musty was famously left off the team for last year, and it seems like, not that he will make the team guaranteed this year, but it seems like it's a lot more likely than it was last year.
Sure.
They've lost a lot of
massively
players.
Disappointing if he doesn't make this year's team for sure.
And he's been playing well, putting up points, playing that offensive style that he's accustomed to. So I think he will make the team as well. But and he actually played well last year at the World Junior Summer Showcase, but it didn't seem to matter for whatever reason.
Right. Well, the way that he phrased it, he was talking with Chris Peters, the Flow Hockey interview, and last year he was kind of earmarked, despite what he did at last year's Summer Showcase. He was earmarked more for a bottom six kind of role, but his game didn't really adjust. Speaking of, say, Svoboda, right? Musty's game didn't really adjust to that. And so what he took from it is that he's got to be more defensively reliable and things like that. And so if that's what he took from it, that's going to help his whole career, not just whether or not he makes the World Juniors team, but the Sharks, the AHL, and even in the OHL being more defensively sound, because again, just being an offensive guy isn't enough as you go up the levels.
Yeah, when we mentioned that last year too. We thought that there just wasn't that space for him with the game that he plays right now.
Right.
And this year it seems like there is. It doesn't mean that he can't get away with not playing defense, but there is at least space for him. And they need his kind of scoring touch with losing a lot of the guys they did last year. So at least it's hockey. That's all I've got to say. At least it's back to hockey. And then we have the Hlinka coming up soon as well. So we should have some more coverage of that the next couple weeks. All right, finally, on our last topic of the night, Bret Hedican is moving from the San Jose broadcast booth to the San Diego Gulls.
He's a player development. No, he's a player development analyst. So basically, he's working in player development. And we talked about Hedy last week, so no need to repeat too much. But I think that should be a good role for him. He has a very sharp mind about the game still, which we hear on the broadcast. And I can see him being a very good teacher. And so best wishes to him. And hopefully, next time we see him, he'll be in the Ducks front office or something like that. But definitely a change of career for him, right? He's been broadcasting with the Sharks since 2009. So for 15 years there. So this is definitely going to be a shift from being a broadcast booth. But in terms of just what he shows and what I know of him, that this sounds like a great role for him and somewhere that he can still shine.
And it did feel like he had that bit of like coach in him while he was broadcasting.
Sure.
So I like the move. I didn't realize he'd been with the Sharks for 15 years.
Yeah.
It's an interesting, like, normally guys get into a rhythm and kind of stick to it. They either go broadcasting or executive or coaching or scouting or something, and they kind of like stick with it. And he's like kind of making a U-turn and going back to player development. So that's interesting. All the best to Hedy, because he was a great broadcaster and we're going to miss him for sure.
Yeah, still curious who they're going to replace him with. We'll see.
The answer is Sheng Pang, actually. I'm going to report it now on... I'm kidding.
After I gave the defense an F+ grade there, I don't think...
you're screwed. It's over with. But that's all we got for this week. There's not a lot of Sharks news. But we do.
Okay, we're gearing up for training camp coming soon.
Yeah, we're gonna have many things out, and the interview with Colby Cohen is great to hear his perspective from a guy who watches so much college hockey that he's voting on the Hobie Baker.
Oh yeah, that's the other tease from it, that we actually got an answer from somebody who voted for the Hobie Baker Award, why Will Smith wasn't a top 3 finalist.
And was Will Smith a top 3 finalist on Colby Cohen's ballot? We got to find out. So it's great to hear.
All right, we recorded that interview with Colby a while ago. So
it's kind of been in the backlog.
The substance of it, but
it's been in the backlog for a little bit. But
it's a great interview though.
It is really, really good. And Colby is... He also has, their own podcast, Morning Cup of Hockey, and he's, great to talk to because he's very used to being a podcaster as well. So you guys should stick around. Join us next week. Hopefully have more World Junior Summer Showcase, maybe some other news, who knows? And then we'll see you soon. But bye.
We've got a special guest. We have ESPN's college hockey color commentator, Colby Cohen. He also co-hosts Morning Cup of Hockey. To say
That's
that
right.
fast 3 times. Morning cup of hockey on Daily Faceoff with Johnny Lazarus. And he also played, as you can see in his background, he also played in BU and in the NHL. Welcome to the show, Colby.
Yeah, no, look, I appreciate you guys having me on, and it's fun to do San Jose stuff now. There's a lot of excitement around your guys' team. I mean, I kind of got on board a couple of years ago, and when you guys hired Quinny and you hired Greerzy, because they're BU boys and they're friends of mine, and you know, obviously not everyone is still around, but you know, you brought in another pseudo BU guy and Ryan Warsofsky to be the head coach. I know he was already there, but you know, Ryan didn't play at BU, but we still consider him to be one of our own because his brother was there, and his family was just so present during our you know, our years at BU, and you know, we were so close. So we consider Ryan to be one of our own, and so yeah. Now you guys took Macklin from us, but like I said, I'm okay with it because, like I told Gruzy, if you're taking Macklin, you better take Will Smith too to keep the balance of power in Hockey East, and he did it. He did it. He looked out for us, so it's exciting in San Jose right now.
Yeah, it's Dean Latournier's world now in Hockey East, I guess.
He's gonna be an exciting player to watch. I mean, he came on our show at the draft, and we got to know him a little bit. I mean, the kid's built. I'm like, are you sure you shouldn't be at the NBA draft? Or are you at the right
wrong
draft?
one?
I mean, this kid he's an absolute monster. But I'm bummed out that we didn't get him at BU. But I'm excited to watch him play at BC. I mean, for me, like it's the best when those are the best two teams. Like if you ask me, if I could choose, I'd love to see BU number 1 and BC number 2, obviously not in that order, but I love when those two teams are really good. It just makes for great college hockey, and you know, the rivalry is such a historic one that I was so fortunate to be a part of, and you know, meant so much to me during my hockey journey.
And speaking of BU and Macklin Celebrini, obviously the Sharks have signed Macklin Celebrini, 2024 first overall pick. He forgoes his college eligibility in BU. So anyway, in your estimation, how likely was it ever that Macklin would go back to BU? I would just say that I thought it was a very, very low chance. Very, very low, like tiny.
I mean, honestly, like maybe less than 10%. I know that he was always saying the right things because he's such a humble kid, and I just don't think you want to go on the record assuming anything. And you know, look, Cole Iserman and him are best buddies, and I do think Cole Iserman was putting a lot of push on him to try to get him back. But at the end of the day, like, I just think it came down to the fact that he's ready to take the next step. I don't think that this was he was first overall, so he has to go. I don't think Mike Greer said to him, you have to sign or we're not drafting you. I don't think any of those things happen. I think at the end of the day, you've got Jay Pandolfo, who watched Macklin play every game of his college career. Jay Pandolfo and Mike Greer are very, very close. And I think there's a lot of trust. I think San Jose was there watching Macklin a good amount last year. I ran into some people from San Jose at Agganis Arena numerous times last year. And I think at the end of the day, the kid's ready. Like, I mean, I would have loved to have seen him back at BU for obvious reasons. But you know, when I watch him play hockey, he screams, I should be in the NHL. I mean, that's how good he is. That's how complete of a player he is. He's not your typical teenager with a lot of holes and a lot of areas that you'd say he's deficient in. That doesn't mean he doesn't need to get better. He will get better, but he just plays a very mature game. He plays like a 27 or 8-year-old. And that's not just at the college level. That was at the World Juniors, and you know, will probably be what you guys see from him when you start watching him starting in preseason here in the next couple of months. But you know, he's a very complete hockey player for a very, very young man, and you just don't see that often.
Right. And what I've heard is that if he could have played in the playoffs this past season as a 17-year-old as maybe a fourth line center, which is actually an incredible achievement for a 17-year-old in the playoffs too. What do you think about that? If he had dropped Macklin Celebrini into the playoffs on a playoff team, could he have played a regular role for somebody?
I mean, I think he would have quickly worked his way into a even more impactful role, but you're right. I think he's got the type of game that can thrive in any situation. A physical game, he can play. A defensive struggle, he can play. If you want to get into a face-off battle with him, he can do it. You want to ask him to kill penalties or protect a lead, he can do it. And you know, I've seen some incredible players at B over the years. You know, Jack Eichel obviously was a tremendous talent freshman who won the Hobie, like Macklin. You know, I played with Colin Wilson, who was the 7th overall pick after our freshman year at BU. And I mean, Colin should have won the Hobie Baker. He lost to his teammate, Matt Gilroy, that year. We had 2 players in the final 3. Colin was 18 years old. Matt Gilroy was 25 or 26 years old at the time. So, you know, and when with the Hobie Baker, a committee that I've actually sat on for the last 3 years, it's not always just hockey. There are other factors, and I think that's why Colin didn't win. But, you know, long story short, I've seen a lot of tremendous talents there. Kachuk was obviously one of them. Zegras, Farabee. You know, there's been a lot. And I think the thing that most impressed me was that Macklin was not just the best player offensively, but he was their best defensive forward as well. And, you know, you look at Jack Eichel. Jack Eichel did not ever make the commitment to that side of the puck until he got to Vegas. And, you know, I was with John Stevens the other day, one of his coaches, actually, because he's a local guy in this area. And he said that Jack Eichel is their best forward on the offensive side of the puck, and he's their best defensive forward now as well. Wow. Now, he reached that pinnacle late into his 20s. He had been in the NHL for 7 or 8 years already before he got traded. And look, he went from a shit situation to a much better situation, less chaotic, more stability, whatever. But Macklin is that guy. I mean, I watched BU last year, and, you know, I watch them every Friday and Saturday night. I've got, you know, very young children who go to bed very early, and my wife and I are home. And so, you know, 7 p.m. rolls around and ESPN Plus goes on, and we watch the BU games. And, you know,
sure your wife was thrilled by this.
You know what? I think my wife got really into it, which was really cool to see. Like, normally if I'm not calling or working the game, she's not interested in it.
Right.
At this point, she's probably not even interested in that. She's like, okay, I've seen enough. But, you know, I think she started to see how much pride that I take in the program and how into it I really do truly get. And so I think she kind of got into it as well, and, you know, started to really follow the players and, you know, see, and she obviously knows a lot of the former players, my friends, some of the coaching staff as well, are former teammates of mine. But, you know, when Jay Pandolfo, who is a Stanley Cup winner and widely known as one of the best defensive forwards on a New Jersey Devils decade of like unbelievably good defensive teams, when he has the trust to put this kid out on the ice at 17 years old, when there's a face-off in the defensive zone with under a minute left and BU's winning 3-2 or 3-1 or whatever, I think that for me was like the first eye-opening that I had, where I was like, this kid is just different. It's not even that he's just better than everyone. It's his maturity level and how rounded out his game is. And then I'm just watching him game in and game out change, you know, whatever style the game needed to be that night, because Hockey East, sometimes you play older teams that are physical. Then you get into a game against BC and it's physical and it's high skill. And it just kind of changes. And watching Macklin, you know, be able to adapt to all the different types of things you see at that level and then do it with a massive target on his back, which he had. I mean, I was blown away by all of that night in and night out.
For those of us unfamiliar with the college game or watching a lot of it, is that unusual for a 17-year-old, a first-year guy like that, supposed offensive guy like that, to get those kind of end-of-game draws? I mean, does that usually go to older, whatever,
not unusual? It's unheard of. It doesn't happen. This college hockey is an older game. I mean, the average age of a college team is 21 years old. It's not. most programs are getting kids that are coming in as 19 or 20-year-old freshmen. Now, BU and BC and Michigan and, some of those schools, they get the high-end 18-year-olds. But a majority of the kids got to go play juniors for a year or two and come in as an older guy. And so, he's sometimes going up against freshmen that are 2 years older than him. And at that age, 17 to 19 is a hell of a lot different than 25 to 27 or 30 to 32. I mean, it's night and day different. So it's completely unheard of. I don't think Jack Eichel, while Jack Eichel was as dynamic offensively as Macklin, I think Jack Eichel had probably some more high-end offensive players around him at BU. I think there was a couple more super high-end players that he played with that Macklin didn't really have. Macklin had good offense around him, but he's other than I think Lane Hudson, who is an elite offensive mind, I think most of the players were good players, but not elite offensively like those two players are. So it was unheard of, guys. It really was. I mean, you just don't see a kid of that age come in and have the physicality and the strength to be able to compete and to be able to take the physical plays. And like I said, I mean, he took more high hits than any player in Hockey East this year. I mean, and he never missed a shift. He never stayed down on the ice. He never missed a power play, which he drew all the time. It's really, I mean, this guy is a generational type of talent, and we get one or two of these guys like every 5 years, it seems like.
Wow. Well, I got something else that you said I got to put you on the spot on because I've been wondering about. So Will Smith, how could he not be a top 3 finalist for the Hobie Baker?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's kind of crazy, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not. The criteria for picking the Hobie Baker guys is there isn't one. They do not. It's basically like, okay, you're on the committee, you tell us what you think. Well, and I remember my first year, I'd ask the question, well, what do points versus age weigh, or what does experience versus this way or that way? And they'd say, we can't answer any of those questions. You watch college hockey, you tell us what you think. And I think what happened for Will Smith is the fact that like him and Cutter Gauthier being in that race together, it hurt Will Smith. Okay. And I think Cutter Gauthier was a little bit of a bigger name, and he had a lot of goals, and he was a sophomore. I got to tell you something. They hate giving that trophy to a freshman. They hate doing it. They almost try to persuade you not to do it, because I think they want to promote players that stay in college longer rather than the freshmen. I saw it with Colin Wilson, who went, who should have won it as a sophomore and didn't. When that's the year Gilroy won.
Gilroy. Right.
Matt Gilroy won. And so, I thought that was crazy. I had Will Smith in my final 3. When the way we have to rank 5 players, and then we submit it, and there's a point system. I had Will Smith in my group, and I also had Cutter Gauthier, and I also had Macklin. And for me, like, I don't really care if you're teammates. I don't care if all 3 players come from one team, from one conference. That I don't care. I think a lot of people try to vote against that. They don't want to see it all from one team or one place. And the other thing is there's a whole crop of Western voters, people from the Western side of the United States that cover the Big Ten. They cover the it's not the WCHA anymore, the NC, the NDC, the
NCDC.
You can never get the letters right. The NCDC. It's the conference Denver's in. It's an incredible conference. Very big, strong, heavy conference. But a lot of people follow that conference, and they don't follow Hockey East, right? And so I honestly,
wow, West Coast bias. Okay, I'm from LA, so all about that.
Well, it's the usual complaint is East Coast bias, is what everybody complains about with college hockey. But I thought it was crazy. I thought it was ridiculous, especially because he won a bunch of other awards, and you're kind of like, well, how does he win this, but he doesn't end up in that? Guys, I shake my head at it too. I'm one voter on a big committee, and when we get together on the committee call, which is like a call with everybody, I don't say 2 words. I just listen. I'm not on there arguing like a lot of people are. I just kind of keep to myself and put my ballot in. And but I shook my head at it too. Don't worry.
Yeah. How many people are in the committee?
It's a good question. I think it's about 20 to 30 people, I think is what it is. And it's a mixture. There's writers, there's NHL scouts, there's a couple of media or TV people. And you kind of serve like a term. I think the term is 3 or 4 years. And then you nominate somebody else. And so, there's some good NHL people on there. And then there's some people, I think, in my opinion, that only watch or cover 1 or 2 teams, and otherwise they just look at the stat sheets. That's just my opinion. I don't know that to be true or not, but based on some of the things that I hear, I wonder like how much do you really watch when you're saying things like that? But that's how hockey is in general, guys. That we all have our opinions. You may think I'm an idiot because I think one thing, and I may think that person's. It's like anything in life, right? Like it's subjective.
Right. I just want to put a plug for our boy Chris Peters, not on the committee. You should be on the committee one day. So I just want to put that out there to you. Wow. So
yeah, well, maybe Chris, when I'm hanging up my clipboard on the end of my term, that's maybe a good person to nominate, because Chris Peters does. I mean, you're talking about Chris Peters, who does all the prospect stuff and everything, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, he's great. I follow along Chris's stuff. When there's players that I maybe haven't seen, or throughout the year when he's talking about like USHL players, and like he's really, really good. No one
goes as deep as he does, especially USA Hockey. He used to work for USA Hockey. So.
Yeah. No, he does a great job. I lean on his stuff to guide me on who I should watch, right? Like I'll look at his stuff and I'm like, hey, these are the guys that I need to make sure that I watch so I can have my own opinions. But I definitely do lean into some of his stuff.
And Colby, you've already mentioned it a few times, but starting off in the NHL, sometimes they have young players transition to wing first before playing center. But what makes Macklin so ready to be an NHL center like day one? I know you mentioned a few things already, though.
He doesn't cheat. He doesn't cheat for offense. And when do you find a teenager that doesn't cheat for offense? It doesn't happen. I mean, even McDavid, had to kind of learn that kind of thing. And I mean, Sidney Crosby is probably the closest example to a guy who just never cheated for offense. And if you asked me to compare Macklin to one of these generational superstars that have been carrying the game for the last 20 years, to me, he reminds me the most of Sidney Crosby, just because of the fact that, tell me what Crosby's best at. I don't know the answer to that, because the answer is everything.
Living now, life.
If we talk about Ovechkin, we can pick out what he's best at. If we talk about Patrick Kane, we know what he's best at, or the 1 or 2 things. And listen, again, those guys also belong on Mount Rushmore. I'm not taking anything away from them, but if you put if you put my feet to the fire and you say, what is Macklin's best trait? I don't know the answer to that, because he does everything at the top, at the best level. And, that's why
hair.
You're right. His hair is great. He does have good hair. I mean, even that, right?
I got to put on a ball cap. I'm feeling self-conscious.
Macklin, I think, is a guy who will be able to play center as a teenager in the National Hockey League. It doesn't mean he might not play a little bit of wing, because, they're going to have to mix and match and see where things are at, right? But I think he's the type of guy that's going to be okay with the responsibilities of being a centerman. And when you're a centerman in the NHL playing in a top 6, the players you play against, you can't cheat. If you cheat, the puck will go in the back of your net as a center. It is the most important forward position on the ice for the forwards, right? So, but I think he'll have success at it. I really do. And I think, the partnership and the tutelage he'll get from Ryan Warsofsky, I think will be really important. And I think it'll be really good. And throw Brian Wiseman in there as well. Who I think the world of, is a guy who was, part of the team that recruited me to Michigan 150 years ago, it feels like now. But yeah, I just, I think he'll succeed at that position. I think quicker than Connor Bedard will succeed at the center position, just because I think Bedard has, while he might be a little better offensively and he may be able to, be in his own category the way he could shoot or he could score, I don't think he has the completeness to his game that Macklin has.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And yourself sort of being inside at BU and also watching so many of Macklin's, covering so many games this year as ESPN's college hockey commentator. Just what have you heard about Macklin off the ice, in the room? We've heard so many good things, but what have you heard?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just what I've heard; it's actually what I've seen. Like I've sat down and sat at pregame meal with those guys before. When I'm in Boston doing a game, I'll go over in the morning, hang around. I'll be at the skate, and then I'll go and have pregame meal, and I'll sit with the coaches. But I observe, and I think the thing about Macklin that was so impressive was that he had 2 feet in the whole year, and it's hard to do. Right. Colin Wilson was my roommate at BU at the time and struggled with that because he kind of had 1 foot in, but he had the NHL pulling him away and pulling him away. And he wasn't drafted until after his freshman year. So he gets drafted and then he does come back for 1 more year. But it's difficult to balance those things, knowing everybody's in the stands watching you every night. And this kid just had such a good head on his shoulders and he was very present. He was a good teammate. He didn't act bigger than the team. The rookies are supposed to pick up pucks. He's picking up pucks. The rookies are staying out late and getting on, the freshmen, I say rookies, but I mean, freshmen. Mm-hmm. He did all those things, right? And I'll tell you how you can tell that he was so loved from his teammates. Half the team flew to Vegas to watch him get drafted. There was no secret that he was going number 1. Sure. And I ran into about half a dozen or 10 or 12, a dozen
and guys who weren't getting drafted, right?
No, guys that have already been drafted. I ran into Shane LaChance. I ran into Devin Kaplan. I mean, guys that are sophomores, juniors, freshmen, they went all out there just to hang and be with Macklin. Now, there were other BU kids getting drafted, so they were obviously supporting them. But these kids flew across the country to go support a guy who only played there for 1 year. And I thought that was extremely, nobody really covered that or talked about it. Sure. I didn't see it written anywhere. BU didn't make a big deal about it, but I know they were there and they were there to support their teammate because at the time he's still their teammate. And I think he'll always be their teammate, but just acted like a normal college kid. One of the guys, he didn't isolate. When the guys went out to have a good time, he was there. When the guys went to team meals and went to people's houses, he was there. So he just wanted to be one of the guys. He wanted to come in. He wanted to do his thing. Now, you get on the ice, well, he's different. He's more competitive than everybody else. He wants to win at every single drill in practice, whether it's a warm-up drill or a battle drill. But, the stories about his off the ice and how he was as a guy at BU, they're true and then some. And that's not just secondhand. I physically witnessed this time and time again, how other players gravitated to him. And he's quiet. He's not a loud guy. Yeah. He's not the class clown making jokes, but players were gravitating to him even as a 17-year-old freshman and looking out for him too. Like, I think some of the older players felt like, all right, this is a guy who's special. We need to make sure we have his back. We need to protect him. And it was great to see. Like it makes it all the more fun when he's that good on the ice and that good off the ice.
Now, I don't know if you've ever watched the Kevin Costner movie Draft Day, but you've just used the draft day test. Why Kevin Costner didn't draft that quarterback prospect number 1? Because
no one went to
those
his
guys
birthday.
Didn't go to his birthday party.
Yep. Nobody went to his birthday. And when he opened the playbook, he clearly never opened the playbook because he didn't know about the money in the playbook. Right. I mean, I know the movie well. I like it. It's fantasy land, but I like the movie.
But Macklin's BU teammates would definitely go to his birthday party.
They flew across listen,
to go to his draft
it didn't hurt that it was in Vegas, right? Like what 20-year-old, 21-year-old kid doesn't want to go to Vegas? But I thought that was a story that didn't get covered by anyone because I don't think anybody said it out loud. But I'm telling you, there was a huge contingency of players. His coaches were there.
Right. We saw Pandolfo there.
Pando was there. Pereira was there. Like these guys, they wanted to show up for a kid who every day showed up and wore that jersey really proud. And I couldn't be more proud to have him as an alumni. Now that he's making money, now I can hit him up and tell him he needs to donate to our alumni collective. That will be coming
that, Macklin?
soon.
I'll be an extension of that, all right?
You can let Macklin know now that he has officially signed that contract, and we all know he's going to make
those performance bonuses this year.
He's going to make a lot of money for the next 20 years. So I'm going to be asking him for the same amount that I asked Jack Eichel and that I asked Charlie McAvoy. He's getting and Kachuk. Macklin's going right into that top tier of players that we're going to be expecting some big old checks from here once that second contract comes around.
I love it. And I guess speaking of like performance bonuses and everything, what do you project from Macklin in his first NHL season? Like, what do you think is going to be his biggest struggles, and what do you think we've already talked a bit about what he's been going to be good at, but what do you project from him overall?
Well, I think he's going to have the same struggle that any college player goes through their first season, or really any first year player, is just playing 82 games and playing 3 and 4 games in a week and having to play at home on, a Wednesday and then jump on a plane to Dallas and play Dallas on a Thursday on a back-to-back and get in at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And, you look at the travel in Hockey East, you play 35 or 38 games and you're on 5-minute bus rides to BC to Northeastern. UMass is Lowell's 30 minutes away. And your longest bus ride is 3 hours, right? And you go the day before. So I think just being able to compete at the level he competes at for 82 games, like I think that will be a challenge for him. And I see that being the only area that he may struggle with. Is a lot of guys hit a wall. They come out of the gate, they play they play rookie camp.
Right.
And for him, he's going to go 150%. And then he's going to play preseason and go 150%. And then the season's going to start. And so when you start adding all these things up after development camp and the way this kid works, like I think that could be an area that's going to take him some time to adjust. But like most elite players, I think he'll figure it out. And I have to think that Ryan Warsofsky and Mike Greer know that too. I think I don't have to think. I know they know that. So how do they manage him in preseason? Like the temptation is going to be to roll him out 5 of the 6 games, right? But maybe that's not the best way to do it. Maybe it's playing, the first game at home and then give him a day or two to go upstairs and watch a little preseason and then get him back into the lineup later in preseason as it gets closer to being actual NHL speed, right? As we know, preseason game 1 and 2 are kind of one way, 3 and 4 go to another speed, and then 5 and 6, when the rosters are coming together, get pretty close to what a regular season game will feel like. Not quite, but close to it. So I just think managing his energy and playing, he's going to play, with preseason and, with whatever they do in rookie camp. I mean, you're talking about a kid who could be potentially looked at to play like 90 games this year. They're probably not a playoff team, right? So
no, probably not.
You're looking at 82 if he stays healthy, which we hope he does, knock on wood, and I think he will, but plus a couple of preseason games. So, you're going from playing maybe the most 40 games to close to 90 games. That's a massive against bigger, stronger competition. So I think that's something they'll have to manage, is make sure that, they manage his energy. And again, he'll want to stay out in practice. If it's a 30-minute practice, he'll want to be on the ice for 90 minutes. He'll want to be out 30 minutes early and stay out 30 minutes late. So just kind of learning how to hone all that in, I think will be important for him. But, I think that he's going to have, I think he's going to be successful. I really do. I don't think that there's going to be this massive learning curve. I think you're just going to see a guy who goes like this, just like Connor Bedard did, right? He got off to a good start. There's a little bit of this, but the valleys are not deep, right? Sure. I think you can expect a little bit of a wave, but I don't expect to see some crazy peaks and valleys from a guy like Celebrini. I think it's going to be very gradually going up with, some speed bumps. But I think he's going to put up numbers. I think that, they're going to surround him with some of the more, I guess, talented offensive players that they have. I know it's not a super deep team full of super talented offensive players. But look, he's going to have to learn how to manufacture offense when you don't have $10 million forwards around you. They don't have that right now. So I think having Will Smith is going to really help him, because I think they're going to go through experiences together, and there's nothing like having a wingman to lean on. It is so crucial. I had it in my career with Kevin Shattenkirk. We went through all the experiences together, one step at a time. We were in the Atlantic District program together, starting at 12. We played together all the way through. We made the U.S. team together. We committed to BU together. We got drafted by the same NHL team. We went to training camp together. We signed our contracts literally in a bar together because we had the same agent, and we literally signed them. And then here, get this, we faxed them. That's a term that most people are not overly familiar with.
We'll explain afterwards.
So we did everything together, and the comfort of having him there, as somebody that I always looked up to, and it was a best friend, but also a mentor, even though we were the same age. Having that was really comforting for me. And I honestly can point to when we got split up, when I got traded to Boston. Things never really went well for me after that. They really didn't. And I feel like losing that hurt. And I think those two players coming in together with the pedigrees that they have, I think that's massive. It reminds me a lot of Kane and Jonathan Taves and the path that they rode. And then the only time they ever split up was to Team USA and Team Canada, which we'll see from Smith and Macklin. But I think that is a huge bonus, having those two coming in and going through these shared experiences together.
We talked about Will Smith in May, you and I, a great interview back then. And I tried to pin you on a points projection for Will, which was probably pretty tough back then, especially because we didn't know who the Sharks were going to add. But I'm going to try you on that with Celebrini. And your prediction, Celebrini and Calder, what do you think?
I have a hard time seeing how he wouldn't be in the conversation. And I'd say the same about Will Smith. Like, I could see them being in the top 3 or 5 together come Calder, because I just think the world of both players. And it's because I've watched both players play so much. Mm-hmm. I'm still not going to give you a points projection because I'm just not, I have no, like, it could be so circumstantial, right? But
sure.
I think that he's going to have a similarly productive year that Connor Bedard had. And I think that we're going to see him in more situations probably than Connor Bedard was seen in. I think you're going to see him kill penalties at some point, maybe not right off the bat, because you want to manage his ice time. You don't need to be giving him 24 minutes a night as a forward. Like, find a sweet spot in that 15 to maybe 18-minute range, get him used to it. But I think you're going to see Macklin playing in more situations probably than Bedard was able to, because I think Connor Bedard is a little more deficient in his defensive game, right? Sure. Just like I said, he's a little bit higher end offensively. So it's going to be a good year for him. I think that, again, the way I'm looking at it, guys, and the way that I'm tracking these young guys is like, how are they, what's their progression? Are they continuing to climb, right? Or are they having massive peaks and valleys and having inconsistency problems and having 5 really good games and 5 really bad games where you're like, geez, like, does this guy need to go to the American League? Like, that type of thing. And that's kind of how I, analyze this stuff and evaluate this stuff as I look at the progression, because we are talking about teenage kids.
Right.
And what do you think about the players that Mike Grier has kind of surrounded Celebrini and Smith with? They've added in Wenberg, Gaudreau, Tyler Toffoli was a big name. What do you think about those guys that they've added?
I think they're great names because those guys all have winning pedigrees. And I know they're not, maybe you could look at that and go, geez, I'm 5 years late for the prom with a couple of these names, right? But at the end of the day, Toffoli's won. Gaudreau's won. These are guys that have won, and these are guys that are good pros. And I think they did that in Chicago with Foligno and Corey Perry. And I know that obviously didn't work out all that well because of what happened off the ice, but still, Corey Perry's won. Foligno has been wildly successful in his career. He's been a captain. He's a consummate pro. Toffoli, same thing. Like, you hear really good things about Toffoli in the locker room and as being a part of the group and a part of the team. And I very much trust Mike Grier. I really do. I go back to being in the same workout group with him when he was at the end of his career at Mike Boyle's. Him and I were at a lot of days in the summer, 6 a.m., together as workout partners. And then once guys went back to playing and I was still rehabbing a surgery and he actually had retired, but he was still working out, I got to spend a lot of time with them. And I think he's got a vision. And I again, you never know how these things are going to play out, but when he goes out and brings players in, even if I'm kind of like, that doesn't make sense to me, I think he knows what he's doing more than I think I know what I'm doing. So I lean into that, and I trust his decision-making on some of those players. So I'd love to see them add a little more offensive talent. I would, like pure offensive talent for these kids, but I like the Toffoli deal, bringing him in. I think Goudreau, again, the guy's won Stanley Cup, maybe one, or did he win two in Tampa? I don't know. He was two. I mean, you can't surround these young kids with enough players like that, because it doesn't matter what you do. You're not going to win right away. You're just not. I mean, you're not built to win. You're in a rebuild. So you need players that are still, you trust that when they come to the rink, they're going to still be good professionals, and they're not going to be, swearing and MFing the organization and the coach, and, Ryan Warsofsky doesn't know what he's doing, and Mike Greer doesn't know. You need guys that are going to come in and find a way to be positive and be good, uplifting professionals no matter what. And not every player is like that, who can thrive in those types of situations. So I trust Greersy when they bring those types of players in, that those are the pieces that are going to be good for those guys this year. Now, next year, you'll see. I bet you they go out and they get another offensive player or two, like Chicago did this year, right? They went out and signed a couple of guys. Nothing crazy, nothing ridiculous, but they took another step, and they said, okay, we're going to give you just a little bit more.
Right. And we've talked so much about what Macklin is good at. So what does he have to work on, improve? Or is there any specific thing, or maybe there isn't really?
No, listen, of course. I mean, he's going to have to continue to get bigger and stronger, like every player.
Yeah.
And I think what he's going to really have to learn and lean into is, his ability to still be as good defensively, but it's harder to create offensively. So putting himself, into scoring opportunities in areas. You're not going to beat goalies clean like you were able to in the USHL and in at BU. Goalies are much harder. Even, backup goalies are way harder to score on at that level. So just putting himself into good scoring areas. I think the thing that he's going to have to learn and do the most is just learn the game of the NHL. Like, how do you manage a game in the NHL versus college? Like, how do you manage your 18 minutes that night against, taking faceoffs against, Anze Kopitar all night, or taking faceoffs against Sidney Crosby all night? Like, how do you maintain that defensive posture while still being able to create for your team offensively? Because they're going to look at him to create. It's not like they're like, oh, he's a first year, so we're not looking at him to. The Blackhawks looked at Bedard to carry their entire offense last year. So I just think learning the NHL game, I'm not going to pinpoint his skating or his stick handling or his physicality, or because he does all those things, but he can't and he won't take his foot off the gas. Like, he's still a kid. He needs to get better at anything and everything. But as cliche as that sounds, that's how the best players are. Patrick Kane spent his summer this summer reinventing, how do I do something I've never done in the NHL for the last 16 years this summer as a 36-year-old. That's the difference. I had Dylan Strome on my show earlier this morning on Morning Cup of Hockey, and he's played on a line with McDavid in the OHL, then Kane in Chicago, and now Ovechkin. And he said the thing with those players is, even into their mid-30s, obviously McDavid isn't at that point yet, he's like, those guys are never satisfied. They still are trying to reinvent new things that they can do to be better hockey players. And I think the same goes to Macklin. Those are the Mount Rushmore guys. They're like, okay, yeah, I'm here in the NHL, but I still need to be better. Oh yeah, I'm the best player on my team. Well, I got to be the best player in the league. I got to be the best player in the country. And those are the type of things that drive those players. And I think that's the type of thing that drives Macklin.
On the flip side, though, if Macklin Celebrini being 18 years old, we don't know what his career will be like. So if he doesn't pan out, why do you think that would be?
I've never thought of that. I really haven't. I've literally never put a thought into that, because I'd say he's about as sure a thing as you can have. There is no such thing in the draft, but I mean, watching him as much as I have, like I've never been so confident. Like I saw Connor Bedard play World Juniors and some different highlights and stuff, but I never watched Connor Bedard like I watched Macklin. And so I don't have an answer for you because I've really never put any thought into it. And I don't just want to BS you and make something up just to answer your question. Listen, injuries can derail anybody. I mean, listen, that doesn't matter what sport we're talking about or what talent level. I think, you start having injury troubles that can absolutely kill your career pretty quickly. Other than that, guys, like I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you. Maybe I need to think about it a little bit, but I just look at a player without deficiencies. Like, what do we say? Oh, that guy doesn't skate very well, or oh, he's not big enough, or he doesn't play in the hard areas. He's a perimeter player, or yeah, he doesn't have the motor, or he doesn't have the drive. Like these are all things you hear when we're drafting players and we're talking about future prospects that no one's perfect, right? You'll never hear any of those things about this guy. Like all of those things that I hear NHL people say about prospects and players, those don't exist for him. So I don't have a good answer for you. I really don't. I hope that's something that we never even really have to talk about.
Well, not having an answer is actually a very good answer here. But Colby, just a couple more questions here. Appreciate your time so much. One more for me. I think one more for Keegan. So when we talked about Will Smith and May, one thing you said is I would expect these two guys to lift Stanley Cups together. That's Celebrini and Smith. So just what's so special about this combination? Why does this combo fit so well?
Well, look, these are elite players. I mean, as far as players not playing in the NHL right now, these are probably 2 or 3 of the best players in the world not in the NHL that have not sat foot. Maybe there's a couple of other guys like that Mitchkov who's come over now and a couple of others. But, these are special players. Like they have winning pedigrees. They played in their World Juniors. They've represented their countries. They've won and been successful. Celebrini won a USHL championship. Will Smith, won a beat. Did they win the Beanpot this year? Did they beat? Yeah, they beat up. Yeah. They won the Hockey East championship this year. No, Northeastern won.
Northeastern,
yeah, not BC. But still, like these are winning. They win a World Junior championship this year. Like they have winning pedigrees, these guys. And when you draft a player, I think you can tell a lot in their first year about who they are and what they're going to be. I think that when you see these kids get drafted sometimes and then they don't have a great year, coming right out of their draft year and whatnot. So I just think that when you have two players and you have a 1-2 punch, and I look at the way the dynasty of the Chicago Blackhawks were built, and it was built on a 1-2 punch of Kane and Taves. Now, look, we can't forget about Seabrook. We can't forget about Duncan Keith. Like, those are integral parts, and they had to go out and fill a roster and fill a team. But when you have two players like Kane and Taves, like Celebrini and Smith coming into the league at the same time, living the experiences with the drive and with the experience that they have not in the NHL, that is my expectation for them. These are special, special players. These are not, there's plenty of kids that go in the top 5 that don't turn into special players. And you watch what these kids have done into their college years, which is that step before the NHL. And you're like, holy shit. You're like, these guys are better than we thought. Like Will Smith in a redraft, you're talking about Will Smith going even higher in a redraft situation, right? I mean, what do you go 4th overall? I
went 4th, yeah. I mean, but the top 3 are pretty impressive, and Bedard, Fantilli, and Karlsson.
Right, I know, but like still, I mean, like I think that after the year Will Smith had, I think all of a sudden teams are like, okay, like him and Fantilli might be on the like that. You might be splitting hairs there, or you look at Karlsson and you're like, at the end of the day, like Smith may end up being a more impact player in the NHL than Karlsson. So, you just don't see these 1-2 punches when a team gets basically 2 first overall picks. I mean, they got 2 first overall caliber talented players coming in at the same time. Look, the way they're going to win is with a good GM and good coaching and doing a nice job of filling the rest of the roster. But they're coming in at the base of a rebuild. They've got the ability to have patience and time building this roster. They have a young coach with a winning pedigree. They've got a GM who's been around the NHL for an incredibly long time, who's very well respected. And so when you put all those things together, like, I very well could see these guys having a dynasty type of career where there's a 6 or 7 year window where they're competing for a Stanley Cup every single year. We know the best team doesn't always win it. Sometimes a team gets hot, sometimes some bounces. They're the best team maybe for that couple of weeks. Maybe they weren't the best team all season. So you still need a little bit of luck. You still need some health. You still need bounces. But I think when you have a base with those two players, I think you're primed to, have that type of Chicago level dynasty that I hope San Jose gets to enjoy and endure for the next, 10 years.
I love it. As a Sharks fan myself, it makes me a little bit happy to just hear. Basically, every time we have a guest on to talk about Macklin or Will Smith, we kind of ask them their expectations of their ceiling, and we always get the same two names. It's Sidney Crosby or Jonathan Toews. It's like the two guys that seem to match the type of game that Macklin plays. And does that outcome, as either between those two or one of those two, seem very possible to you for Macklin? It's like a final question.
It's the same two names I would give you. It's the same two names I've used. I think that maybe he plays the game faster than Jonathan,
Sure.
than Taser does. But he really is. He's like a hybrid of the two. It's incredible. And those are the two backbones of a lot of Stanley Cups. And the leadership skills. Will he grow into that type of leader? That remains to be seen. I think that's the one piece that I think those two guys are they were born to lead. Those two players in particular. I spent time around Taser in Chicago. I was just with him this past maybe 2 weekends ago at a wedding. So it was good to catch up with him and see him. But he's just, even when we're at a wedding, like full of hockey players, people are drawn to him. They follow him. They want to know, hey, like, there's this funky dress code for this wedding. Like, what are you going to wear? Guys are just, it doesn't matter what these natural born leaders do in life, guys, like people just follow them. And we'll see, does Macklin have that? I don't know the answer to that question. We'll find that out over the next number of years, but that to me is the ceiling. And that to me is the comparable, is those two players. And those two players had the same thing in common. They both wore the C for teams that went on runs that dominated the NHL for a length of time. So, you should be excited. I think good times ahead in San Jose, maybe not right away, but at least now you have a reason to go watch the game. There's players that are worth the price of admission, and then get in at the ground level, because they're going to build this thing up. And 3-4 years from now, this is going to be a team that I should be competing for a Stanley Cup. It takes time, and rushing a rebuild is the kiss of death. So hopefully the owner gives Greersy the opportunity to do it right, like the Wirtzes are giving Kyle Davidson the opportunity to do it right. Nobody's putting a gun to his head. Nobody's rushing him. They just want to see, here's the parameters. We need to get a little bit better. We need to improve, but we don't want you to go sell the farm. We don't want you to rush this. We want you to build this foundation. Well, I think San Jose is doing that now. We didn't talk about, the kid they drafted, 10th overall, the defenseman.
Sam Dickinson. Yep.
We didn't talk about some of the other prospects that they have. Like, they're building a core. And when your core is built from within, you can go find your Marian Hossa, and you can go find your late stage, all-star players that are 29 and 30 years old that have winning pedigrees. Like, you can do, that's the easy part. The hard part is building a base and a foundation of young players that are all coming at the same time, that are learning what it takes to get it done. And that's where I think there's similarities to the Chicago dynasty. When you look at the prospect pool now and you look at the draft capital, they got a hit on these picks, but so far you got to like what they're doing and what you're seeing with some of these kids.
Wow. Well, we have the draft day test that Macklin Celebrini has already passed. Now we have the wedding wardrobe test that you said out there.
The
That Macklin's got to
wedding
pass
wardrobe
here, so.
test.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good one. We're gonna rename this podcast the Celebrini Hype Podcast because we haven't
yeah,
had like
that's
a
good
full
name for next month or so.
we haven't had a full, I guess, Celebrini Hype podcast.
Listen,
other than every day, but yeah.
I lived it in Chicago, guys, with the whole Bedard thing and the rebuild, and I know how dark those days were. And I had to get on TV every night and try to find something good to say about my employer. I didn't always do a great job at that. Which is probably why I didn't last overly long in that seat. Because fans can smell BS from a mile away.
Sure. Yeah.
But look, it's good when the West Coast is competitive, when the Kings are good, when the Sharks are good. The Shark Tank used to be bumping when all those players were coming through. I was playing in the minors in the American League when the Worcester Sharks had a lot of those prospects coming through. I mean, Logan Couture and I played against Logan 100 times, it felt like, in the American League in Worcester when they used to have which I mean makes absolutely no sense to have your
Worcester
American League team coast to coast. But all those kids, McGinn and Couture and Stalock was on that team, and those guys all came up and played roles when the team was really good. And I even remember when Setaguchi got sent down, or Chichu got sent down to the minors at one point, and we'd see him and Johnny McCarthy was on those teams. I know he ended up finding his way up to the big club, and now he's a head coach in the American League. So, you just you see the importance of building that foundation and building those prospects. And those were great years for the San Jose Sharks. Those were years where they were knocking, and everyone thought every year it was their year, and like they'd come up to the conference finals and they'd fall short. But they were some damn good hockey teams.
Yeah. Can't wait to get back to it after this last year of us having to make a podcast every week of the worst team in the NHL. So excited
I did
to have
it in Chicago, guys. We had a podcast in Chicago, and the difference was my paychecks came from the team. So, just be happy that you can actually say what you really want to say, and you don't have to worry about, HR violations because you're talking about your own employer.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Colby, for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah, after Macklin's first hat trick, we'll call you back.
I love it.
Exactly.
I love it. All right, guys. Have a good rest of your summer.
See you.